So good evening, everybody. I am only recording this not to put you on the spot, but because I've been asked by some people who couldn't make it tonight. Please record this. Welcome. This is the first time that I'm doing something like this in a lecture format. It's kind of something that would lend itself more to a workshop format, because we're going to be talking about skills that you need to develop, or that it's good to develop if you want to have better communication in marriage. So I'll try to bring some examples that can illustrate the concepts. And we may do, if I can get volunteers along the way, a little bit of role playing we might do. But that's only if I can elicit a willingness on your part to volunteer to be my assistant in that. So we'll have to see how that goes. But it's very effective to see it in real life, to actually observe the implementation of some of these principles in a real interaction. And the best way to do that is often role-playing. So there are going to be two main sources from which I'm going to draw, or three sources from which I'm going to draw the content of this series. The first is, of course, Jewish tradition. I'm going to be bringing Jewish sources from the Tanakh, sources from the Talmud that pertain to marriage, that will help us from a spiritual standpoint. And I'm also going to bring knowledge of psychology. As you know, that's my background. My academic background is in psychology. And the third thing, which 10 years ago I wouldn't have had as much to offer, is my experience in counseling couples, which has been, over the past decade, a great deal. So I'll be able to bring from these three sources, hopefully, insight that will benefit you in your relationships. And, I'm going to sit down for now. I might have to stand up later. That hopefully will benefit you in your relationships, and that I think, all of you will find useful. Even if you're not having problems. This is not necessarily, like I said, a support group for people who are having problems. Everybody can benefit from this, no matter where you are. And really, what we're going to learn is that the principles of effective communication in marriage are no different than the principles of effective communication with any other human being. The only problem is that we forget in the context of marriage sometimes that our spouse is a human being, or that we are. That's really the challenge. It sounds funny, but it's true. We know that what goes on behind closed doors between a husband and wife often doesn't look anything like the behavior that we exhibit outside of closed doors. And I know that everyone here who's married can relate to that. The way that we speak to one another and the way that we interact is not always what we'd want anybody else to see.
Thank God.
Thank God. Well, thank God that they don't see it. Yeah. So, true. But one of the principles that we're going to keep in mind is if we treat our interactions with our spouse and our family members with the same care and the same forethought and the same reflection as we treat our interactions with people in the so-called outside world, we'll be a lot better off. And that's why the first principle, or what I would call the Yisod HaYisodot, as the Maimonides would say, the foundation of foundations of understanding how to make a marriage work, or how to make any relationship work, is to remember to use intelligence. And to remember to use your sechel, to use your brain. I know that seems very obvious, but if you think back on all the fights that you've had and all the disagreements and the ways that you've handled it for however long you've been married, however long you've been with your significant other if you're not married, you will realize that in every circumstance you failed to follow this first principle in one way or another. You weren't using sechel. So the first principle, or really the bedrock of all the principles, is using intelligence. And what does using intelligence really mean when it comes to any interaction that you have with other people? It's thinking about the consequences of what I'm about to do. It says, Ezehu chacham haro'eh hanolad, it says in Hebrew. That's what I was saying in Pirkei Avot. Who is the wise person? Somebody who sees the future. What that means is somebody who makes choices and behaves in a way that the consequences are agreeable to him or to her. In other words, somebody who thinks about cause and effect, the relationship between his or her behavior and specific outcomes, desirable or undesirable. So for instance, just to use a very blatant example, and we're going to go back to these examples as we move forward, we're going to revisit many examples, and of course all identities will be changed. So if you're listening to this recording on the internet, and you know that I've counseled you in marital counseling before, don't be afraid. I'm not going to let any cats out of the bag. Imagine this: you come home, and or something goes wrong, and you say to your spouse, "You idiot," how likely are you to get the outcome that you want from the situation now? Obviously, your chances just plummeted, right? Your chances just plummeted. You still may be able to work your way out of this. If you claim, for example, that you were talking to yourself. Generally speaking, you already lost before you even started. Why did you lose? Because you started aggressively. And you didn't think to yourself, are these really the words that are going to get me the outcome I want? So if we're always thinking in terms of, like I said, Yesod HaYesodot, the foundation of foundations of understanding how to interact, is to remember cause and effect. To remember to use sechel, to remember that my behaviors and my words have an impact on the world. There's going to be a reaction and a pushback, and I have to be prepared for that. So I shouldn't let anything come out of my mouth or any action be enacted by my body without being capable or being willing to deal with the reaction, the outcome, the consequence of that behavior. So that's number one. Now that sounds like, oh yeah, well of course that's common sense and everybody knows that. But as they say, common sense is not that common. That is the greatest challenge, to think about the short-term and long-term outcome of the choices that we make. So given that as our sort of frame, let's start with 3 principles we're going to learn tonight. Okay? There were 3 different things. And I wrote them on a card for myself because my printer doesn't work. So, the first one is, the first principle, because I know that I can only give you 3 big ideas in one sitting. So the 3 big ideas, big idea number 1 is, censor yourself. Censor yourself. What do I mean by censor yourself? Just because you think something doesn't mean you need to say it. Isn't that true? We all know that. Would you want other people to say everything that they ever thought about you to your face? Or to anybody else? Probably not. So do them a courtesy and censor yourself. Where do we see this? Even in the Tanakh, even in the Torah we see this. Because God says, or the angels say to Abraham, you're going to have a child. And what does Sarah say to herself? She says, I'm going to have a child at this age, and my husband is so old. And what does Hashem say to Abraham? Sarah says she's too old to have a child. Is that all she said? It's not all she said. But God even knows to censor himself when he speaks to Abraham. Why do we censor ourselves? Why is it wise to censor yourself? Because in life, we always want to choose the most effective route to getting somewhere. If you're interacting with your spouse and it's a potentially volatile situation, which is really the only situation where you need some developed skills. In the normal situations of interaction, you don't really need to bring any skills to bear. It's natural. You don't have to always be employing skill. But when there's a problem going on, and you decide to tell your spouse what an idiot they are, and how you always do this, and you're so stupid, how is that going to help you? Is the first question you should ask yourself. Saying you're so stupid, you never think, this happens all the time, this is the pattern with you, I can't stand you, I wish I never married you, all those things that you're thinking at that moment are making you lose sight of whatever goal you had. What was the goal that you had? That's the question. Keep your eye on the mark. Usually, calling somebody names is not an effective way to get them to do something for you or to engage them in a conversation. As a rule, am I right or wrong? Has anybody ever called you a bad name and you said, I'd really like to continue interacting with this person? Just think about it that way. So once you start attacking another person, you can already pretty much guarantee it's not going to be a fruitful dialogue anymore. So when you get into that mode where you really want to remind the person that they do this all the time, and they are incompetent, and they are this, and they are that, think to yourself, what do I want to get out of this conversation, first of all? I want the person to agree with me on a certain course of action. I want the person to fix a problem. I want the person to change their behavior. Okay? So what is a way that's going to make them want to change their behavior? Not by calling them names. That's going to make them even stronger in whatever position they already have, because now it's a fight. Right? Now it's personal. Now it's about my ego. You called me a fool and that I'm this and that. Well, I'm going to tell you all the bad things you do. And then we completely lose sight of the discussion at hand, of the situation at hand. And we leave with sour feelings, and whatever the original cause was for the interaction has been forgotten. Because now it's about what she said about me and what he said about me. We've lost the whole picture. So, rule number 1 is, it's okay to censor yourself. Your spouse did something that upset you. They've done it 5,000 times. But you know what? The first 4,999 times don't really matter right now. And telling them that they've done this 5,000 times, and reminding them of the 4,999 previous times, and implying that there's something wrong with them that they keep doing it, is not going to address the problem. Okay, your husband forgot to take out the garbage. This never happens. It's just a theoretical, hypothetical. Husband forgets to take out the garbage. The wife comes in and says, "You lazy, good-for-nothing husband. I always have to remind you. You forget every week. What's wrong with you?" What is the husband thinking now? He's not thinking the following: I'd really like to make my wife happy by responsibly taking out the garbage immediately, just as she would like. That's not what he's thinking. What is he thinking? How dare that woman speak to me like that? She has no respect for me. She doesn't know how hard I work, and why am I here, and why am I doing this for her? That's what he's thinking. Am I right or wrong? So by attacking, and by bringing up the past, and by labeling the person, by calling them a name, you have gotten the opposite of what you actually wanted to get. Because what you wanted to get was, let's say, compliance. Okay? Or you wanted cooperation. You wanted to be able to remind your husband of something that he forgot to do. Or you wanted to point out a situation that needed to be corrected. But instead of pointing out the situation, you wound up attacking the person and putting them on the defensive. And now you create an enemy, because all that's going to happen is, even if now your husband does take out the garbage, now next week he's not going to be any more solicitous of taking out the garbage. It's not going to have brought you guys closer together. It's going to have caused him to do it perhaps out of resentment and anger and feeling, and this is horrible, and I'm angry about it, and I'm going to do it anyway. But it's not going to help make your relationship healthier, because you attacked him. Whereas if you went to your husband and said, "Oh, I noticed that the garbage was still inside. Did you need some help with that?" "Oh, no, I'll take it out right away, honey." Am I right that that's what would happen? No husband wants their wife to suggest that she might help them take out the garbage. God forbid, it's blasphemous. Right? But the suggestion in a really positive way of, "Oh, I noticed the garbage was still taken out. Was not taken out yet. Did you need some help?" "Oh, no, honey, I'm going to take care of it right away." What's the difference in the way that you presented the problem? In one case, you presented it as, "You're good for nothing, I'm attacking you, I'm putting you down, there's something wrong with you, why can't you get it right?" And you're feeling terrible about yourself. In the other case, your wife comes over and says something, or your spouse comes over, it doesn't have to be the wife. Maybe in some households the wife takes out the garbage, I don't know. I'm just using a typical, conventional example. In another case, the wife is coming over to you and making it seem that she wants to help you. Wow, that's so sweet, but no thank you, I'll take care of it myself. Yes?
Maybe this is just me, but I feel that if I presented using your words, I would sound very sarcastic. And I know tone is a big thing.
I'm not giving you a script. This is not scripted.
No.
Everything has to be tailored to the specific relationship that you have. But the main point is not how you express it, because obviously the way I'm expressing it is a little bit to the other extreme. Granted, it's the other extreme. But it can be done in a non-judgmental put-down way. And I'm just trying to point out that when you do it in a judgmental put-down way, you're not only not going to get the smiling, compliant result that you were hoping for, you're going to sow seeds of even more resentment for future conflicts. instead of thinking of the long road down, further down the road, and what the next situation is going to be, and what the next battle is going to be. So that if we can do things in a non-confrontational way, and one of the best strategies for non-confrontational motivation of others is to point out a situation rather than to point to the person. Like say, oh, I noticed that there were some clothes on the floor upstairs. As opposed to, you disgusting pig! Why do you leave your clothes all over the floor all the time? Because now you're like, well, now this is a matter of my ego. I don't like that. And then you're going to say, well, you're disgusting because you do this and you spend too much time in the bathroom and I can never get in. And okay? It's just going to become a fight. As opposed to pointing out a situation where you've empowered, you've respected the other person, you've given them their space, but you've pointed out a situation that you'd like to be fixed. In a relatively non-confrontational way.
But sometimes these dynamics and habits are really built in. And so there's just no way to mention, because even if you mention it in a nice way, the dynamic of you're the messy one and I'm the clean one, or you're the one who's forgetful and I'm not, or you're not, sometimes they're so built in that there's no way to point out at all.
I understand. You're saying when you already have you're already in each other's throats about these issues.
Not necessarily, but even the nicest way of saying
will be taken as an attack because it's a sensitive issue.
Because of the person's sensitive issue.
Right.
And especially in relationships, this is great for office politics, people you don't have that much relationship with. But
when there's an ongoing feeling of sensitivity over a certain thing,
there's very different
I'm known for always forgetting things, and you reminded me of it.
Right.
So now I'm going to be really upset because you're implying that I always forget things.
You do it in a really nice way.
Right, you're doing it in a really nice way. So that's a more complicated type of situation where you have already about a certain issue an ongoing, already unhealthy interaction. Let's say that you fought over it before. Because if the spouse knows that you think that they're a dirty pig, that means that you've said that to them before. Maybe not in so many words, but more or less you've conveyed that to them already. So you've already gone down the path that's not so good. All right, so let's start though fresh. And then we'll come to these more complicated situations. So the ideal world is that we don't have to call any names and we don't need to put people on the defensive because it's not practical to do so. Now you might be in a situation where you need to be even more sensitive because the person already has open wounds about a certain issue, and almost anything you say might cause them to react. And then we have to think of that as a special circumstance that needs to be repaired. Okay? But ideally, lechatchila, as we say, okay, in the ideal first case, we don't want to come at somebody in a name-calling mode. Because when you name-call, you started a fight already. It's not a discussion, it's not a request, it's not a conversation anymore, it's a fight. And now it's about my ego against your ego and who's going to win and who's the stronger one, and it becomes a struggle right off the bat. So we don't want that to happen. So we're trying to avoid that as much as possible. That's principle number one. And we're going to come back to these principles. Principle number two is keep in mind, what is your objective? Okay? What's your objective? So aside from name calling in and of itself, what's your objective in a situation? And when you're thinking about what's your objective in a situation, let's say you need to talk about an issue that's really bothering you. Okay? Now, most of the time, when you want to talk about an issue that's really bothering you, your objective is to have some common understanding with your spouse so that they understand where you're coming from. You have the opportunity to air whatever your issues are and that they're able to respond appropriately. Okay? So let's say, for example, you're really upset because of something your spouse did or said or something they've continually been doing, and it's really upsetting you, and you haven't handled it. So there are 3 ways people deal with this, and 2 of them are not healthy. The first way is what we would call the submissive way, which is they just take everything into themselves. They never say anything. They're crying at night, they're crying to their friends, they're crying to their dog, they're crying to their cat, they're crying to their ice cream. But they never say anything. That's not healthy because that means there's no communication going on. The other way is the aggressive way, the screaming, the yelling, how can you do this to me, you're horrible, you're terrible, and so on and so forth, which may sometimes solve an immediate situation, which is why it's so tempting. It's so tempting because from sheer force, you can get things done sometimes. Think about bad bosses versus good bosses. Bad bosses scream and yell, and they get the employees to work. But in the end, in the big picture, they have a horrible relationship with their employees, and the dynamic of the office is very unhealthy. As opposed to bosses who are more collaborative in the way that they interact. And that's really what we're looking for. Or you have both extremes. You have bosses where they don't tell you anything's wrong, and then one day you get fired. And you're like, well, what happened? Right? So that's one extreme. The other extreme is you get screamed and yelled at whenever anything goes wrong. So what's the ideal? Not that you keep the feelings inside, because by the way, there's no such thing. There's no such thing eventually. It comes out some way or another. Or you try the aggressive, angry, yelling, attack approach. But there's a third possibility, which is that you try the assertive but not aggressive approach. And what's really the difference between assertive and not aggressive? The assertive and not aggressive is describing, and again, we're going to keep coming back to the same principle, not involving the person, but describing the situation. That's always what you want to do. So, if you say, you are a mean, horrible, insensitive, cruel, uncaring, terrible person. Wow. That's now all of a sudden I feel like I have to justify myself. Right? You're going to tell me I'm a horrible person. What am I going to say? That's not true. I did this for you. I did that for you. What do you mean I'm cruel? What do you mean I'm horrible? He's just going to be defensive. So you didn't accomplish anything. However, if you say, when you said this, I felt horrible. When you said XYZ, when you did XYZ, when such and such happened or such and such didn't happen, I really felt very sad. Now all of a sudden, what did you just do to the other person? If I come to you, imagine, come to you and say, you are a mean, despicable person. How could you say that to me? Well, I'm not a mean, despicable person. I'm a nice person. But if I said to you, when you said that I was a terrible rabbi, it really hurt my feelings. Now what did I just do? What did I do? What are you going to do now?
You made it about you.
Victimized yourself.
I made it about me, not about you. And I give you the opportunity, instead of putting you on the defensive, now you have to fix the problem. You feel a need to fix the problem because I'm saying to you, I'm really hurt. As opposed to when I attack you, I become the problem. I become the problem. And communication is everything in this. It's how you present it. You're saying the same thing. I'm saying I'm upset because you called me a terrible person. You said some terrible thing about me. That's why I'm upset. But if I present it as you are a mean person, you said a terrible thing about me, I can't believe it, that was so mean, that was so horrible. Now I'm the problem and you're on the defensive. But if I put myself on the defensive and say to you, I felt really terrible about what you said, it really hurt me, it really made me feel sad, all of a sudden your impulse is, I don't want you to feel sad. I want you to feel better. I'm sorry about that. I'm not going to do it again. That's the impulse that a person will have. That's what it will bring out of them. So it's all in the presentation. If the presentation is you're a bad guy, you're going to pull back from the person. If the presentation is I feel really hurt, your impulse is going to be to move towards the person. What can I do to fix it? What can I do to help? Now, where do we see this in the Torah? Where can we see this from a Jewish perspective? Since we want to work in some Divrei Torah here, we see the best case of this is not a marital relationship, but it's actually Lavan and Yaakov. When Lavan and Yaakov, they have an ongoing dispute, and eventually Yaakov runs away, and Lavan chases after him. And when Lavan catches up with him, as usual for Lavan, he puts all the blame on Yaakov. All the blame is put on Yaakov. You ran away. You stole my stuff. Yaakov responds. It says, Vayarev beLavan. He argued with Lavan. And what did he do? You cheated me. You gave me the wrong wife. You changed my salary 20 times. I was working out in the field. You made me suffer. I had a horrible life for the past 20 years. What are you talking about? Does it have an effect? Zero. Zero effect. And it's the same thing whenever you try to put the weight of the problem on the other person. In other words, whenever you put the other person on the defensive, it always becomes a power struggle. The only way to solve a power struggle is to step back and describe how you're feeling. Describe the situation without making the other person the enemy. This is really the key of keys. The third principle I want to talk about is how to listen to people. This is my favorite thing. Because this is the thing that I most often have to teach couples literally how to do. By taking each spouse and having a normal conversation with them. Okay? You come home from work. Well, I'm just going to use husband coming home first. Because actually, honestly, usually it's the husbands are the worst at this. But I don't want to be, I'm not trying to discriminate, but that's just the way that usually is. So the husband comes home from work. And the wife says, oh my God, I had a horrible day. This happened and that happened and this went wrong. And the husband says, so the wife says, my car broke down today. Okay, I'll take it to the mechanic and fix it. Today I realized that, I went to the store and I couldn't find a dress that fit. Okay, go to a different store tomorrow. Does this sound like a common interaction? One person is giving an expression of they're very frustrated. Okay? The other person's response is, what are they trying to do?
Give solutions.
Fix it. Right? Especially men. They like to fix things. That's why they like tools and stuff. They like tools. Right? They like to fix things. So the wife says, I went to the store and couldn't find anything. I'll go to a different store for you tomorrow. Even if he offers to do it himself. Right? He wants the conversation to be over. Okay? That's the reality of it. Okay? And if it even takes me going out to the store, I'll do it. I just don't want to hear about it. I've been working all day. I want to zone out. I want to be in my own world. Leave me alone. That's the way that men typically think. So they'll fix the problem, and they think they're amazing. I'm a hero. I mean, I fixed all the problems. You had a problem with the electricity. The lights are not working. I'll change the bulb. The garbage needs to be taken out. I'll take out the garbage. The car needs to be fixed. I'll fix the car. And the groceries need to be gotten. I'll get the groceries. There's no problem. But there's no conversation going on. Okay? The woman says, I'm feeling really down. I'm not happy. Life is not going the way I want to. The husband says, let's go on vacation. I'm going to take you out to dinner. I'm going to take you to the movies. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Why don't you try a new project? Again, what is he doing? He doesn't want to talk about it. He wants to fix it. This is the most typical interaction. 99% of couples that come to me for counseling, this is at the core of their problem. This dynamic. So what's the solution to this? I always tell couples, this is my rule. Don't go away from the emotion. Go towards the emotion. That's the catchphrase that I give them. Don't run away from it. Go towards it. What does it mean to go towards it? The spouse says, I hate to keep using man and woman, it's just that's a typical situation. Spouse A says, oh my God, my life is horrible. I have so much going on. I'm overwhelmed. This didn't work, and the groceries and the clothes and the spouse 2 says, I'll fix it. We'll go on vacation. We'll find you a new job. You'll be able to do this. You'll be able to do that. That's one way of working it. So what is that person trying to do? Shut off the emotional valve. Let's fix it. What's another way of doing it? Spouse A says, my life is horrible, everything is going wrong, my shopping trip was a failure, my clothes trip was a failure, my car broke down, this and that. And the spouse says, you had a really difficult day today. It sounds like you're really frustrated and feeling terrible. All of a sudden the spouse says, that's right. And I just feel like no matter what I do, I can't get out of this rut. I don't know what to do with myself. It seems like it's endless. You're really feeling lost and hopeless. I can feel it. All of a sudden, the spouse A is understood. You actually understand me. You know what? Here's a trick. You don't have to say anything that your spouse didn't already tell you. You don't have to be a genius. All you need to do is actually be listening well enough that you can tell them back what they told you. Because 99% of what people want when they complain, think about yourself. You're feeling down. Someone says, I'll fix it for you. I'll do this for you. I'll do that for you. That's not what you want. When you're feeling down, you just want somebody to come over to you and say, I understand, and and listen to you and make you feel that you're appreciated, that your feelings have value. That's what people want. To be valued, to be respected, to be listened to. They don't necessarily want the problem to be fixed. And 9 times out of 10, that person who is kvetching about how they're hopeless and their life is horrible and they're overwhelmed, once they have somebody listening to them, they will get up themselves and say, you know what, I'm going to make a list for tomorrow and I'm going to organize it and I'm going to solve it. And all you did was give them a listening ear. And I'm not saying that it's not magic. It really works. So without the judgmental, so how do you do that? How do you listen to somebody? Well, one of the things you don't do is give advice. Giving advice is a terrible thing to do for many reasons. First of all, giving advice sounds like you're trying to solve the problem instead of really understand the problem. And when someone's kvetching to you that their shopping trip was a failure, they didn't get anything they needed, and the clothes didn't fit, and the car broke down, and the kids were sick, and this and that, they don't really want you to fix the problem. They know you can't fix any of those problems. And they know that you don't want to, they don't need your advice. They know that the advice is to go back to a different store the next day. They don't need that. They just want you to empathize with what they're feeling and show that you care and that you're willing to listen and process what they have to say and show them that you understand. Meaning you're not watching the game while you're listening to them. You're not reading the newspaper or doing something online. You're actually looking at them, listening to them. And I've literally taken couples where this is a problem, and either on Skype, sometimes I counsel people on Skype or I counsel them in person, and I'll actually take, usually it's the wife, and I'll have a conversation with the wife just to show the husband how to listen without giving advice or solving the problem. And it's unbelievable. I don't say anything to them that they didn't tell me. All I do is try to understand. You're frustrated, you're feeling hopeless, you're feeling down, you're really struggling with that. You really feel like you're in a rut. That's what people want. They want to be understood. And usually just being understood, the feeling of being understood, empowers the person to solve their own problems. So don't give advice. Don't give advice for many reasons. Number one, avoid giving advice because if you give bad advice, forget it. You give the wrong advice, now it's on your head. You don't want that. But besides that, advice is taking out of is putting yourself above the person. It's saying, oh, you don't know what you're doing. That's why you have such a bad life. I, on the other hand, know exactly what should be done, and I'm so wise, and I'm going to enlighten you by giving you my sage advice. Nobody wants that right now. Nobody wants that ever, really, when they're feeling down. That is not what they want. They don't want to be talked out of it. That's another thing. This is another great one. A person's feeling very depressed. I'm imagining the person right here. They're telling you how hopeless things are, how sad they are, how depressed you are. You're still alive, aren't you? There's so many good things in life to live for. Why are you depressed? Think about all the blessings in your life. I mean, are you ungrateful for all the good things that you have? What is the person feeling now? Worse! Oh my God, I was already feeling horrible, and now I just found out I'm a horrible person too. Thanks a lot. Nobody wants you to give them a philosophical reason why they shouldn't be sad. One of the things you can do is minimize your talking to the person. In other words, you just give them back what they're giving you, but repackaged so that they can tell. I don't want to say so you pretend. So you're really listening. You really have to listen to pick up what are the emotions, what are the feelings. And you really have to genuinely care to be able to do that. And if you don't genuinely care, that's another problem. I can't solve that. I'm not kidding. If you don't genuinely care, I can't solve that. You have to genuinely care. So once you genuinely care and you're listening to the person and you understand that what they really need from me is to be understood, you can give them back what they're really saying to you, not psychoanalyzing them. So don't do the following. You know why you're depressed? Because your father did this to you when you were a kid, and because your mother did that to you, and because you grew up like this. Nobody wants that either, because again, what are you doing? You're judging them. Oh, you're messed up. That's why you're feeling sad, because you're messed up psychologically. That's the reason. Nobody wants that either. That just adds insult to injury for two reasons. First of all, it makes them feel lower. It also is acting like I am the psychoanalyst here. I'm going to tell you what you really feel like. It's like, why don't you tell me what I really think and what I really feel? Nobody wants that. They want you to tell them. I know it sounds like it doesn't make any sense, but what they want you to tell them is what they're feeling. Because when you tell them what they're feeling, when somebody says, that's exactly what I'm thinking. When somebody has that moment, that means you've understood them, and that is the best feeling. When you come in to work or home and you say, and it happens sometimes just by accident, you'll say, I had a terrible experience and I feel this way. And somebody says, I know exactly how you feel. You feel this way, that you're so angry, you're so hurt. And, and I absolutely can feel what you're feeling. There is no better feeling than being understood like that. When somebody really empathizes with you fully and you don't feel any judgment, you don't feel any analysis, you don't feel any criticism, you don't feel any attempt to explain or to give advice, but just that the person really is with you in the moment and understands. Now, where do we have this idea in Judaism most prominently? Lo aleinu, when you go to somebody sitting Shiva, when somebody's mourning. What does the Jewish law say you're supposed to do? You're just supposed to go and sit down and not say anything. Why? Because what do people do? Hey, so how are things going? What do you mean, how are things going? Somebody just died. What kind of stupid question is that? So there's nothing to say. You wait for the other person to take it where they're going to take it. You don't decide where to take it. This is the time where they need your empathy. So actually, halakha understands this better than anybody, because halakha says, never try to frame the other person's feelings. Never try to get a handle on it. What does a person really want? What's the ultimate example of the worst Shiva visitors that you would never want to have? In the book of Iyov. If you ever read the book of Iyov, Iyov lost all of his children, he lost all of his money, he lost everything, and he's suffering with horrible disease. And what do his friends come to say? This is all your fault, right? Because you're a wicked person. He's saying, why did God do this to me? And I say, because you're a wicked person. He's like, but I'm a righteous person, I'm so good. Well, obviously you're not, so, drop the facade, man. And that's what they say to him. It's the ultimate example of how not to pay a Shiva call. Could you imagine somebody come and say to you, you're sitting Shiva, God forbid, for somebody, and they say, you know why he died? Because, he smoked all the time and he had cancer. It was his fault. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to. That's not the right thing to say at that time. It may even be true, but it's not the thing to say. And like we said, go back to principle number 1. Censor yourself. A person could be telling you, and believe me, they sometimes do, sometimes your spouse's feelings are absolutely inane and stupid and petty and all of that stuff, just like your feelings sometimes are. So let's just be honest. Sometimes your feelings are also, you're jealous. Everybody is petty with their feelings. It's feeling, it's not thinking. And the key is to censor yourself. Don't say, you're really that upset that you couldn't find a dress that fit. So what? So go to another store. So what's the big deal? What's wrong with you? It might be very petty. It might be seem very insignificant. Just like all of our feelings sometimes seem insignificant. But what you do is you censor yourself. And at that moment, that person is the center of the world. That person's feelings are valuable. You're not there to judge. You're just there to hear them out. And what's really funny is that when you do that sometimes, and you really give them, you really hear it and say, yeah, that really made you upset. That really made you, feel terrible. The person snaps out of it. The person snaps out of it. All of a sudden they're like, thinking about this really isn't that important. They're able to move on because they were understood. It's a phenomenal thing, but it's really true. When you allow another person to be understood, you empower them to be able to move past things that are holding them back. And when you don't, the tension continues to build. They become more depressed. They become more angry. They become more frustrated. They become more hopeless. They become more helpless. Whatever the problem is, it's exacerbated because they just want to be understood. And as soon as they're understood, they're able to pull themselves up. It's a remarkable thing. So I would say that if there's anything we can sort of pull together from the discussion, it is that our key is we're keeping our eye on our goal. We want to keep our eye on what is my objective. My objective always is, of course for all of us, shalom bayit. We want to have peace in our home. We want to have a harmonious, healthy, productive relationship. And that means the ability to have as much happiness together and as little dissent and friction and problems as possible. So if we keep that in mind, we want to do two things. We want to minimize the amount that we contribute to the problems, which means obviously doing all the things that we're supposed to do for one another beyond just our interactions, fulfilling our responsibilities, not name calling, not stirring the pot, not taking out our anger on others to create lots of tension. All those things that we can hold back, not saying the wrong things at the wrong times. And then when our spouse is feeling emotion and is expressing a need to be understood, not dismissing them, but opening up the lines of communication and allowing them to express themselves. Not labeling, not analyzing, not trying to judge, not trying to advise, not trying to fix, but allowing the emotions to come out. Because that actually, what that ends up doing is bringing you closer together. Brings you closer together, makes the relationship stronger when you feel that you can be understood. And it's a very, very, very powerful tool to use. Probably the most powerful that I can teach you. Okay? So, next time you have the opportunity, I can give you many examples of it, and we can even practice it. But the key is, and I challenge all of you, the next time that your spouse is expressing upsetness with a situation, don't try to fix it. It's very tempting. Why? Because, let's be honest, nobody wants someone else ruining their life. And frankly, when your spouse is feeling down and upset, it's ruining your life. Right? It's cramping your style. You're like, listen, I'm trying to have a good time here, and I just came home from a long day, and you are complaining about this and that, and frankly, I don't want to. You're really dragging me down. This is not what I want. So the person's getting in your way. Well, guess what? If you just try to solve the problem, it's going to get worse. If you ignore it, if you divert attention to something else, it's going to get worse. The way that you can diffuse the problem is by engaging, going towards the emotion, not away from the emotion. Don't try to say, hey, let's think logically about this. When was the last time you were really emotional about something, and someone said to you, let's think logically about this, and you were like, hey, that's a great idea, I'm being an idiot, right? That works, right? For sure. No. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants you to tell them, snap out of it, or get over it. My favorite one is, what is the one phrase that never works? Relax. Has anyone ever used the exclamation relax and it worked? It never works. If somebody is anxious, telling them to relax is not only a waste of time, it's going to make them go from anxious to angry. Because nobody wants to be told relax. What do you mean relax? It's a crisis. Now you might be saying, what's the crisis? What's the big deal? Why are you getting so upset? It's not a big deal. That's your perspective. But for this other person, there's a crisis going on. Why are you telling me to relax? Calm down, relax. All of those phrases, strike them from your vocabulary. They are not only useless, they backfire every single time. There is never a good time to tell somebody to relax unless you're a doctor administering an injection or something like that and they need to relax their arm. Okay? There is never a time in an interaction where it is productive to say relax or to tell anybody to have any kind of change of state. Relax, snap out of it, get over it, forget about it. All of these kinds of commands never, ever, ever work. And should be struck from your vocabulary. If somebody right now is feeling depressed, or they're feeling anxious, or they're feeling worried, the last thing that shows understanding of what they're going through is telling them to relax. Because telling them to relax is saying, your emotion is wrong, your emotion is stupid, I don't want anything to do with it, and it's cramping my style. And it's all about me. Whereas when you say to the person, you're really anxious about this. When you're anxious about something, and someone comes over and says, you're really anxious about this, all of a sudden you open up. Yeah, I'm feeling this and this and this. Oh, you're really worried this might go wrong. You're thinking that might go wrong. And the person's able to unload all of their concerns. And suddenly, they feel like a burden is lifted from them. They might still feel anxious, but you understood them. You didn't try to go away from the emotion. You went towards the emotion. and you help them to deal with it and to manage it by giving them that support. It's a very powerful tool. So don't say relax, please. It's a terrible thing to say. Yes?
What if in their anxious state they blurt out, "What do I do?" or "What should I do?"
Well, it depends. If the person is really... My policy is, in counseling especially, but in general, is I never give people advice. I never give people advice for many reasons. Number one, because everybody has to make their own choices and decide for themselves. What your best role is, somebody says, "What can you do?" Say, "What do you see as your options?" And to talk about the options with them and how they feel about the options. And in every situation, they will come up with the answer themselves. They just want to be heard. They just want to be understood. Oh, what are you facing? What are the challenges you're facing? What is the problem? What is the dilemma? What are the choices? Oh, if you do this, what do you think will happen? What do you feel about doing that? People like to talk about themselves. They like to express their emotions and their dilemmas and their whatever the crisis is, and to talk about every possible thing that might happen if I answer. Even forget about marriage. Even when it comes to any relationships, people like to talk about. Oh, he called me, asked me for another date. Should I go out with him? Should I not go out with him? I don't know. They love to talk about that stuff. Now, if you just tell them, "Well, I don't know. Do you think he's a good shidduch?" Okay, so go. You just missed a golden opportunity to connect with somebody. And you didn't build a relationship at a deeper level. Whereas if you say to them, "Oh, you're not sure if he's for you." "Yeah, I'm not sure if he's for me, and these are the reasons, and and they'll open up everything. The floodgates will open. And you'll be able to help the person see their options very clearly and make the best choice for themselves. And that's how you become an amazing resource for them. Because you help them see their options, and you help them make the decision instead of making it for them. And you become closer with the person in the process. It's a phenomenal, phenomenal thing. So if there's anything that we know, we don't want to shut down a person. We don't want to call them names. We don't want to attack them. We don't want to dismiss them. We don't want to tell them to relax, for sure, because that's a waste of time. Here's an interesting thing. It oftentimes happens that you have different personality types in couples. One, it's often, again, a men-woman thing. I never read the Mars and Venus book, but I just know from experience, from the counseling experience. Oftentimes happens that the wife is very anxious and detail-oriented. And the husband is like, "I'm very chill. Who cares? If we lose the house, we'll just live on the street." Not to that extreme. But the husband maybe takes things in stride. The wife's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that she said that. How could she do that?" And I was like, "Don't worry about it. What's the big deal?" It's like that kind of relaxed. Or if there's a problem, there's a crisis, and the wife's like, "Oh my God, we're going to get to the airport, we're going to forget this, we got to pack that, and we have to worry about this, and where's the passports, and and the husband's like, "Don't worry about it. It's going to be fine." So you have differences in personality. Now, one of the things you have to understand is that's very, very important, is that not everybody, including your spouse, is going to be like you. And not everybody is going to have the same reaction to things as you. And that's okay. But what's important to realize is, I'll get the following response from some, usually husbands. "My wife is so unhappy. And it makes me unhappy. It ruins my life. My wife is so unhappy. She's always stressed. She's always anxious. She's always worrying. And I want to enjoy life. It's the weekend. I want to have a good time. I want to go on vacation. My wife, she's so down, and she drags me down. She's such a drag. And I'm very I'm very upbeat, and I'm optimistic." So what happens is, invariably, so what I'll do is, I'll have a kind of discussion with the wife in the counseling, and hear her perspective. And guess what comes to light every single time? Nobody wants to be anxious. Nobody wants to be sad. Nobody wants to be stressed. Nobody wants to be unhappy. They just have different ways of dealing with the problems in life. Some people keep their upbeat feeling by brushing aside things they don't think are important and just striking them out of their minds and ignoring them. And other people keep their feeling of being on top of things, not by brushing them aside, but by obsessing over them and stressing over them and making a million lists and driving everybody crazy. That's how they deal with the same problem that the other person is dealing with. So you could have two spouses. One of them seems like he's always happy, but he doesn't take care of anything, and he doesn't manage any details. And another one who's always seems stressed and is managing all the details and worrying about them and can't sleep at night because he's worried that if they're going to forget to pack something really important for their 21-day round the world vacation. So they're both trying to get to the same place is the important thing to realize. Everybody wants to be happy. Nobody wants to be miserable. So don't say to your spouse, "You're miserable. You always want to be miserable. And you always want to be down. And you always want to be stressed. And what's wrong with you?" Because nobody wants to be. It's just that some people deal with the stressors of life differently. The way that they deal with them is, if I go over and over this in my mind 5 million times, I'm going to feel much better. Because I'm going to feel like I'm in control of what's going on, and there's nothing unexpected that's going to happen. And the husband says, or whoever, the other spouse says, it's usually the husband, the other spouse says, "I'm just going to not think about it. And you know what? If it doesn't work out, I'll find something else. I'll do something else. There'll be an alternative." Now, is either one of those approaches less wise or more wise? No, they're both equally foolish and equally wise. Okay? The guy who's taking a sort of freewheeling approach, he might end up crashing and burning because he's not, thinking out the details. And the one who's obsessing over things might be miserable in the interim because he or she can't get over obsessing over the details. But at the end of the day, they're both trying to deal with the same problem, just in different ways. And to label the other person, "Oh, you're a downer, you're this, you're ruining everything, and you're always negative, and you're always pessimistic." No, it's just that the way that I prevent myself from experiencing disappointment is by thinking of the worst case scenario. That's oftentimes how people think. And you have to, if you accept the person for who they are and say, "Oh, you're worried about this maybe happening? Yes, I'm really worried. Oh, I can understand why you're worried about that. What do you think might happen then?" Let them express it. Let them, be with them in what they're thinking and feeling. And you will see that then they'll get up from the chair all of a sudden and be like, "Okay, it's time to move on." You won't have to move them on. If you move them on, you're not being a nice person. Okay? But if they're ready to move on, then you've done your job as a good spouse. So our goal is always to help the other person feel understood. And there are many, many ways to do this. So now I'm going to turn off this recording. So anybody who wants to say anything personal, it'll just be between us. And it won't be broadcast on the internet, okay? I wanted to add as an addendum to the class something that was raised in the question and answer session at the end that we didn't record for reasons of privacy for those who were attending. One of the excellent points that was raised is how to handle incessant venting. What happens if one partner is always venting, or it's taking up a great deal of time and it never seems to end, and it places an inordinate burden on the other spouse? So how are we to deal with that? Are we just to continually engage and allow the venting to continue endlessly and really to drag us down? I mean, at the end of the day, doesn't the spouse who's the listener have a right to set limits and to say, enough is enough? So the answer that was given is that when we talk about listening, we're not simply talking about not fixing the problem, not trying to distract from the problem. What we're talking about is coming to a genuine understanding of the person. When an individual feels the need to continually vent, that means that person doesn't feel understood yet. When they have the experience of feeling understood, the venting will end, because they'll feel that they've gotten what they want to get out of the venting. Generally, the emoting and the expressiveness and the description is a means to an end psychologically for the person who's doing it. And so we need to keep in mind that that's a signal that we haven't yet gotten to the destination. We haven't yet conveyed to the person venting that they've been understood. We haven't comprehended the underlying message of how they're feeling and what this all means to them, or what they're struggling with, what they're experiencing. And once we've reflected back to them accurately, they'll feel satisfied. So the lesson here is that it's not merely a passive listening, but it's an active listening. Not only because we're reflecting back what the person is telling us, but because we need to exert ourselves to try to understand the subtext, what's underneath the descriptions. Because if we don't grasp it, they're going to give us more descriptions, and they're going to go over it again and again and again, repeatedly, because they feel that they haven't yet conveyed their message. So don't satisfy yourself with simply not intervening, not giving advice, but exert yourself to really grasp the essence of what's being communicated. What are the anxieties of the person? What are the hopes of the person? What are the frustrations of the person? What are the reasons for anger or upsetness in the person that they want you to be able to empathize with and to feel together with them? And when they hear coming from you exactly what they're experiencing in their heart, they won't feel compelled anymore to vent, and you will see that things will be resolved in and of themselves naturally. And so one should not feel that they're condemning themselves to an endless process of listening, to endless venting, because in fact, as the skills of active listening are honed and improved, so too will the speed with which you're able to come to a common understanding be improved, and the health of the relationship will be improved to the point that the venting will no longer be a chronic condition in your interactions.